Hey everyone, this is Christopher Sanchez with the Mesa Verde Group. Thank you for joining us for our first ever podcast and web series where we're providing you insights on what's happening in the state capitol, around the state capitol, in the state legislature, and California politics. Today joining me are my friends Rita Medina from the Latino Coalition for a Healthy California, Juan Altamirano from the Trust for Public Land, and Carol Gonzalez, your Latina advocate. Hey guys, how's it going?
It's good.
Yeah?
It's cold.
It's cold.
It's cold in Sacramento, but it's not cold in other places in California.
No, it's not.
And just a fun fact about all of you joining me is that you're all my closest friends probably in Sacramento, inside the Capitol space and outside the Capitol space.
Oh, I was waiting for that. You bought inside the Capitol space, come outside.
I feel
Appreciate
so
that.
special.
Yeah, no,
Well, that's because
no,
you guys
right?
buy me lunch most of the time, right? On like Saturdays. And then an extra fun fact is that we have two proud daughters from the Inland Empire.
Let's go.
Carol and Rita.
Shout out to Riverside.
And then last but not least, Orange County's proudest sons, Juan and myself. Yeah, so it's kind of a little Southern California coalition collaboration.
Well, I feel like there's overlap because I was technically born in OC, but I raised in IE.
So which one do you claim?
Oh no, it's IE.
That's so funny because I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
It's all SoCal. I don't know what we're doing in
Yeah.
Sacramento, but that's
Trying to make
that's
a
a different
difference.
podcast.
We're
Yeah,
trying
there
to
you
make a
go.
difference.
Thank you.
There you
Thank
go.
you, Carol. Bring it back.
So as on January 10th, the governor released his budget, and as you all know, there were some exciting points in it, some not so exciting points. The governor saying that he's placed a balanced budget, and that's because of what is forecasted or what has been brought to California for tax revenue and so forth, but also because he's using some reserves that California has. But at the same time, he's also putting more into the reserves as well. I think it's about $17 billion that he's putting into.
16.9 billion.
All right, there you go. There's no new programs really. I think the governor has protected all the current programs that are in existence right now. But y'all kind of lobby and advocate in different areas in the state capitol. And so wanted to kind of go to you and see, what did you think of the governor's budget? What's in there right now? Let's go ahead and start with the health policy. Rita, what's in the governor's budget for health?
All right, so I will start by saying that I'm just going to talk about some key high-level pieces when it comes to health, because there's a ton in this budget in general, and then when it comes to health, there's lots of bits and pieces. But one of the things that LCHC, so that's the shorthand for Latino Coalition for Healthy California, that we were really excited to see, and I feel like every year we're excited to see this, is the governor recommitting to Health for All and that expanded Medi-Cal. So for people who don't know, it took a decade for the state of California to fully open the Medi-Cal rolls to everybody who is eligible for Medi-Cal, regardless of immigration status. So if you qualify for Medi-Cal financially, it doesn't matter what your immigration status is, you can apply and use that benefit. And again, that's a decade-long fight, but we're finally seeing the fruits of everybody being able to apply and to actually access this benefit. But it's a really nail-biting thing every budget because it's also really expensive. Medi-Cal costs the state billions of dollars every year, and we are coming up on an inauguration where we have this incoming president who has already made threats, and Congress has made threats to cut Medicaid funding. And Medicaid at the federal level is what helps fund Medi-Cal in the states. And so they have said, for a variety of reasons, we already know that Trump and his folks don't like California. So they're going to do whatever they can in their power to make us hurt. And so we're grateful that the governor has said, I want to commit to keeping Medi-Cal and keeping the funding intact and making sure that if you're on Medi-Cal, if you're going to use Medi-Cal, that you have access to that program. But I think one of the things that we don't know, and this will play out once the new administration comes in, is if that funding from the federal government is going to be taken away, because that could leave a potentially billions of dollars whole, if not hundreds of millions. So we're really going to be on the lookout for any threats that are coming from the federal government. But in the meantime, we have this commitment from the governor to support Medi-Cal as a program. And again, I want to just like ground us in not just the dollars, but actually the usage. So Medi-Cal covers about a third of Californians. And, you know, with LCHC, Latino Coalition for a Healthy California, kind of feels like from our perspective, you can't talk about Medi-Cal without talking about Latinos, the Latine community, because we are 51% of Medi-Cal users. So think about that. Like Medi-Cal as a program serves a third of Californians, and of that third, 51% are Latine. And, you know, we were just talking about the Inland Empire, Riverside and San Bernardino County, it's like 2 million folks who are utilizing the benefit. So, you know, when we think about cuts, if you are getting cuts to a Medi-Cal program that's providing health care for a third of Californians, if California can't back that up in dollars and the governor is not going to be able to commit to that full funding, that's impacting the health of a third of our state. And so like, what does that look like? How does that show up in our day-to-day communities with people not getting the healthcare services they need, not being able to show up to work or the specialty care that they need? And we saw that during COVID. And we know that Latinos are always the ones who are most impacted when it comes to something like natural disasters that we just unfortunately have seen in Southern California, with, you know, workers who need access to emergency benefits, right? It's always a little bit harder, that path for them. Same goes for healthcare. It's always an uphill battle for folks who need access or can't get days off for work for sick time. So we're going to be following that really closely. One of the other things within Medi-Cal that I just also want to mention is that we were glad to see the state extend what's called federal flexibilities until June of 2025. So that gives us 6 months. So a little bit of backstory on this, because it's like very in the weeds. During COVID, Congress basically said, we're going to go ahead and pause annual renewals for people who are on Medi-Cal. Normally, if you're on Medi-Cal, most people have to sort of prove that they're eligible every year. During COVID, it was a pandemic, we needed our health care. There was a pause on that, so people got to just stay on their coverage. That pause started to defrost. Basically, they uncoupled this special coverage, and now our state has been going through this process of redetermination. So going through the rolls, every state has been doing this, but California, again, third of our population, to figure out if you're on Medi-Cal, are you actually still eligible for Medi-Cal? And as advocates, we have been saying, we have these federal flexibilities that we used during COVID. It's essentially taking down the administrative barriers, bureaucratic barriers, and red tape. Why can't we just continue them? It costs money, so you'll see the Medicare or the Medi-Cal costs go up, but it means that people can have that continuous coverage that they need. Imagine, like, if I know from the private, like, you select your benefits every year if you're lucky enough to have a job that gives you benefits. But if I had to go and prove my eligibility, that would take so much time and paperwork. I don't even like filing my, I file my taxes, but I don't even like the process of that, right? So, you know, it's an administrative burden. And then the final thing I'll just say really quickly, so that's like big picture. Just as important, you know, we talk about Medi-Cal, we talk about wanting to protect our investments. It took us a decade to get this expanded Medi-Cal to actually be moving in this direction of health equity, especially for Latino communities. So one of the things that we also want to see is we want to see this state and this governor invest in community healthcare workers and promotoras. And last year in the budget, we had the ability to see a rate increase. So a lot of the promotoras, especially the ones that we work with, they're from community. They're facing a lot of the financial challenges of the same people that they work with to get out the information. For people who don't know what promotoras are or community health workers, these are folks who are in community and they're at your local clinics, they're at health fairs, they're the señoras at the table. You know, have you signed up for Medi-Cal? Did you know? Are you eligible? And what we're saying is that these often women, often Latinas, they deserve a living wage. Right now, they don't get paid the amount that they should. There's been a long fight to try to increase that wage, especially since they do some services under Medi-Cal. And so that's going to be one of our priorities, is trying to get some transparency around their services and increasing and actually investing in our budget. We've got this Medi-Cal benefit. We're trying to move towards this healthier California. Let's actually invest in the infrastructure, and in this case, human infrastructure workers, in order to actually get information to people so they can access these benefits. So it's like big picture, some budget stuff we're watching.
And the Promotora program has actually been so successful that it's been replicated in other industries and sectors where, for workers, they've used the Promotora program. I know there was conversations at the federal level a couple years ago about creating a Promotora program for public benefit programs and so forth. I think there's, so many programs. So it's such a critical component. So, Carol, education is a highly important issue for Latinos. What are some of the highlights of the governor's budget?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to understand the context of what the budget looks like right now. Like, given the fires in LA, there's a lot of schools that are closing down. LA Unified announced, they had closures, so education has a lot of components, actually. There's a lot happening from TK through 12, childcare. But I think it's important for us to understand what's happening across the state and how it's going to impact the education budget. For example, there's a lot of issues that I know you're going to touch on during your segment, but ICE is going to impact how students show up to schools, how that's going to impact the funding that schools receive, and how some of those funds are going to move around. And then education is also managing what's going to happen at the federal level. Is there even going to be an education agency, And so I think most advocates are hopeful. It's kind of hard to destroy systems that were in place like that, but we never know, right? We never know. I had a pause.
No, that's fine.
Yeah. In the budget, I think we could start in the higher ed side. So the UCs and CSUs actually are facing approximately 8% deficit. So the governor, through an agreement that was made with these two agencies, is that there's a deferment of funding. So the UCs usually receive a certain amount of money through a compact agreement that they have. Unfortunately, this year, that money won't be seen until 2027, 28. And so that's going to impact a lot of students who go to the UC and the CSU, because essentially the UC is going to be missing out on $396 million, whereas the CSU is going to miss out on $375 million. These are all approximations, by the way. But the point is that a lot of students are going to be missing out, right? Like, where are these schools going to decide to make those cuts? And for the most part, it's probably going to be like our communities, right? Or programs that they feel aren't as critical to the funding of their groups. So that's on those two agencies. Thereafter, you go into the community colleges. The community colleges are in a special place where they serve a lot of different kinds of students, right? It's your non-traditional students who are actually the majority of the students in that segment, right? They're serving older adults, students who want to reskill, who want to go into their workforce, students who are trying to figure out how they transfer to a CSU, UC, or even a private school, right? And so the community colleges, I think, are in a great place where they got funded at the cost of living adjustment, the same way that the K-12s did. They have a lot of different programs, and the state kind of funds them as categoricals. So they're receiving some funds for some of those programs, but unfortunately not all. So, of course, there's room for improvement, but, with everything that's going on, I will say that the governor is actually funding the master plan for career education, which kind of overlaps with a lot of the education segments. So the goal of this program is essentially to bring together the workforce, bring together TK through 12, folks in the cradle to career space, community colleges, and really figure out how do we align and bring people to work together so that students are actually being supported in their pathway journey. So I'm really excited to see that. And so that's kind of in the funding for K-12s and community colleges because of the overlap. And so I'm excited to see that. Yeah. And then in alignment with the master plan, there was $1.8 billion for a discretionary block grant. And so that's actually money that K-12 school districts are going to have access to, where, it's going to be unrestricted funds where schools can figure out where to put that money. And I think the governor's office did that intentionally because they're trying to say, like, if a school has different needs, how are they going to best assess what that district needs to do? So I actually am really excited for that, and I applaud him for that because, some schools are going to be dealing with the ice issues. Some schools are going to be dealing with fires. Some schools are going to try to figure out how do we actually bring together that vision for the master plan into play in their districts, right? Some schools have programs that overlap with community colleges or with other workforce needs. And so I'm excited for the grant, and I'm hoping that the governor then kind of includes some trailer bill language, which kind of will delineate how that money is going to go out. But that's something that I'm actually really excited for. On the K-12 side, I think there's a laundry list of things that the governor funds and that the budget kind of highlights. But I think something that I'm really excited about is that there's money for math and literacy coaches in schools who have high poverty. So it's good to know that the students who we actually want money to go to is actually going to get that money. In addition, there's some expansion for the Extended Learning Opportunities Program, which is a before and after school program that students use. I remember growing up in the IE, I stayed after school in the ACES program. And so, seeing programs like that continue and succeed is something that I'm always going to be rooting for, and I'm excited to see. And on top of that, I think there's definitely room for improvement, right? There's always going to be room. But I think overall, I was a little bummed out not to see something on Cal Grant reform, right? Because for folks who might not know, essentially, I saw Rita's face. I know. So Cal Grant reform is intended to fund a lot of students who go through the process of applying to school and, essentially they have financial need, right? And so a few years ago, the state legislature agreed to do some reforms to this program to ensure that more students can get aid and make it a lot simpler to understand. And, unfortunately, it's been something that was promised but hasn't been kept. And so who knows if that'll come or if it'll get slowly woven in there, may revise, but that was something I was really hopeful to see. But aside from that, I can see how the governor's trying to prioritize education. And there's a lot of programs, there's a lot of things in the education space, and I feel like we're always going to want to see some improvement, but this is a start for it to be the January budget, right? Yeah.
It's a start.
Yeah,
it's a start.
And I think all of us are like, Carol, when are you gonna stop? But the real reason is because the education piece of the budget is just so big.
Yeah.
And it's needed, right?
Yeah.
And how schools play a critical role in our communities right now, all the time. They're like the best first messengers, trusted messengers for crisis and situations, whatever it may be locally. And so, and the budget and the programs that California's administering kind of speak to that, right? So,
well, and it's kind of crazy too because, to back you up, it's when you were talking about the Cal Grant reform. So when I came to Sacramento in 2020, I was working at the Capitol for a member.
Yeah, I remember actually working with you. But
Cal Grant reform.
Yes,
that's
Cal
2020.
Reform. Yeah.
We're in 2025 right now, and there's no, so. Yeah, to the point of it taking a long time. I was like, man, I didn't even look this year to just see the progress or not on it.
And that's why Rita went to health, because it's there's all these wins already. I don't have to do any work.
Stop. But I think before we jump off of education, overall, there weren't cuts aside from the CSU and UC. So I think personally, really excited to know that K-12s were funded, community colleges were funded. We can always go a little further as well.
when I was looking over the education pieces of the governor's budget, one of the pride and joys of like that he highlighted in his office's presentation was the continuation of the school meals program. Every child in California gets a school meal, regardless of anything, income, whatever. No one has to fill out any papers. California was the leader in the nation for that, and you know, I think when we talk about deficits and hard times and balancing budgets, that's, you know, another program that has a lot of money to it, but it's just needed because no one should have to stand in a separate line for free meals. Everyone should be able to get a free meal regardless, and so that was cool to see. Like you're saying, no cuts to education. It's great.
Yeah.
But there's a lot going on in the environmental space, and
Yeah.
There is.
Tell us more.
Yeah, I mean, Juan Altamirano, Trust Public Land. For people who don't know who the Trust Public Land, we're a national organization that is dedicated to creating outdoor space for everyone within a 10-minute walk of people's homes, communities, to have access to a park, right? And so at the same time, as I'm hearing this conversation about, you know, health and education, huge complex monsters out there, right? Like there's a lot of complexity to a lot of things that you all are doing, which is great, and those are direct impacts to a lot of the people who need it, right? Unfortunately for the environment, unlike education and health, which are core services, we don't get the environment does not get any special funding from general fund. Like I think the environment as a whole and historically, we don't have any dedicated funding. So a lot of the time we have to resort to bonds, and I think that over the last several decades in California, that's how we've been able to move policy agendas to, you know, create clean air, you know, clean water, creating, especially now, fire, right? More fire resilient communities is going to the ballot box and doing that through the bond. So in this January budget, what we're seeing is the allocation of that. So last year, the legislature put on the ballot two bonds, two $10 billion bonds, one for education and one for the environment. And the Trust Public Land, you know, participated in those two bonds to make sure that they got across the line. We were successful in both of those two efforts, and particularly the ones that we were leading on is the climate bond. So this year, what we're seeing as a result of that effort is the governor has started to allocate a significant portion of that $10 billion bond in this. So what you see here is probably about 20% of that $10 billion that he's put forward for a lot of core programs within the environmental space that did not have any funding during the recession or the budget cuts the budget deficit rather that we were facing over the last 2 years. You saw a rescission of and reverting back of money that he had promised when there was a surplus.
Right, that's right.
And so we didn't get any money, right? The environmental space largely didn't get a lot of money in there. So there was projects that, you know, we were told, well, we told you were going to get this money, but you're not going to get it, right? So you're not going to build any of these projects. So now this bond essentially is paying for those projects that were on track to get funding. So the $150 million, or excuse me, $1.5 billion that he's put out now as a result of the response to the fires happening in LA is there's a huge question mark, right, as to how those funds are going to be distributed, partially because through the bond they're allocated and written to the bond in a particular way and how those monies are going to be spent. And they're already broken out into various categories. So that money can't necessarily be used for the response recovery component that's happening, that is happening now and will need to happen into the future. So that's a big question mark, is how they're planning to allocate that money. If it's done, I think they're smarter than this, but if they tried to use it differently, it's going to pose a lot of problems, right? Because there's going to be lawsuits associated with making sure that the bond dollars are used the way that the voters intended it to be used, right?
That's a critical component, right? Anytime the voters approve something and it's passed by the voter, you can't change it, right? You have to do it as prescribed and according to how the voters. Or you can
go back to the voters, right?
Yeah,
and to have them change it.
Have
again.
A whole nother campaign.
Have a whole nother campaign. So that there's a lot of question marks, and again, LA, what's happening in LA is tragic. It's a catastrophe. Unfortunately, we're going to be seeing a lot of these events a lot more in the coming years. We continue to see drought happen. We continue to see extreme heat waves happen. Flooding, which is another component of LA. Of the next phase of what the tragedies are that may happen out there, and we continue to see just a lot of inaction at the national level, and we will continue to see inaction, especially with this incoming administration on issues related to climate, and so it's big and daunting, and in many ways kind of is existential for the survivability of communities, because this last year, 2024, was marked officially as the hottest year on record. Wow. A few years ago, that was marked as the hottest year on record, and so the trend line is moving up, right? In terms of what we're going to be looking in terms of our environment how we are experiencing it. So investments like this are going to be even more critical. And so when you have a budget that's laid out, that's kind of just making it right to the finish line, and you have all these other issues, health, education, climate, those are exacerbating on top of each other. And we're all fighting for that same dollar and trying to stretch that same dollar even more, which is a problem, right? Like, we need to find more of a solution on how do we continue to invest in the things that are meaningfully impacting communities.
That's something that some of the advocates have been saying. They're all, this budget's said to be balanced, right, with a small surplus, but how come the question some advocates were having for the governor is how come there isn't any investments or any proposals to create permanent investments? And because as Juan was saying, we all know, general fund dollars we're all fighting for. We all want it. We're all going to ask for it. But fortunately, though, as advocates, we don't see each other competing for those dollars, because while
I always compete.
I'm hanging on to my Medi-Cal dollars. No one comes for that, especially if we lose it from the federal government. We're just going to be holding real tight.
I mean, they're robbing Peter to pay Paul, and in one way they're robbing from him to pay me, or robbing from me to pay you, or whatever.
I don't think anyone's robbing from me, because in my part of the budget, nothing was cut.
Yet.
Yeah.
No, I mean, but I kind of joke on the yet component, but it's real, right? Yeah. Like when we're looking at a $250 billion tragedy in LA, right? What is that going to do for out years? in not just this budget. Like it might create a little bit of more chaos than traditionally what we were expecting before January 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and whenever the fires happened. And so I that's a big question mark in my mind of like, what is that going to do this year in this year's budget? But certainly for the out years, how much money is the state going to be putting back into Southern California to try to rebuild those communities? Because it's the largest catastrophic fire that's happened, I think, in the nation's history, not just in California. And so what does that look like? The out years that, in the budget that we were looking at already, they were looking at $40 billion in deficit in 2028, 2029, right? What is that? That's just one catastrophe. Yeah. Again, we're going to see more of these fires happen, floods, flooding events. So, like, what is those catastrophes going to add on and pile on to the deficits that we're looking at? So, the cost of inaction in many ways is going to cost us more in the long run because we have not changed the way, our lifestyle as a society completely. But more importantly, it's in the immediacy of things, like what is that going to do to the budget? So because of the response, there's going to be cuts to education potentially, right? Parts of it, or health, or something like that. They're going to be looking at just protecting core services to the state's constitutional ability, right? What is mandated in the out years if we don't get things under control within our environment. And again, this is not a knock on this administration. It's just a reality that every administration, and it started with Brown in many ways, right? And continued during the Newsom administration. But future administrations are going to have to tackle this in a way that is more urgent.
And if we don't invest in environmental components and prepare for crises, it's not just like this year that we're going to be hurting in the budget per se, but it's about next year, because if folks can't go to work or create the revenue that they used to, then our returns for the next budget year are going to be impacted and suffer, right? And so in that regard, I think of the outdoor workers, like the landscapers, the painters. While they might be part of recovery and so forth, some of them aren't going to be working for a long time. Street vendors,
a lot of them Latinos.
Immigrant Latinos, domestic workers, lost their place of employment. IHSS workers, so forth. There's a lot of folks who are going to be impacted, who may, in addition to those who are directly impacted by the tragedies that are happening right now.
Yeah. So overall, the budget at least this year looks good. Partially, it's because thanks to California voters, largely because Latinos came out and voted for these bonds. We're going to see some level of stability to continue to fund a lot of projects that are going to be good for the community. But man, the long term, that's a thing that keeps me up sometimes. Is like, what are we going to do later on, right? Because it's unsustainable. It's really unsustainable.
That's a tough pill to swallow, I think, as advocates, because you hear it all the time from legislators, or when you're going to have a meeting with the governor's staff and they want to, tell you real quick, like, that's unsustainable, that's pie in the sky. But it's also our job to challenge what people think is the norm and to push for things like health equity, educational equity, environmental, like our North Star is what has to drive us. But then when we're getting a little bit closer to it, it is like, well, how do you pay for it? I feel like that's the struggle I always have. Like, I'm never going to stop asking for what we need.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, but like...
Otherwise, I would be unemployed.
Right.
Yeah. Well, but it's not even that. As advocates, like, we know that there's so much that our communities need. Yeah. Just in this governor's budget for this year, when it comes to immigration, fortunately, he didn't cut any of the legal services. but we have a federal administration that's coming in that's going to be more aggressive, and we've already seen some actions happening, immigration enforcement actions happening in Kern County. So prior to his administration coming in, so I think advocates are going to be calling for more dollars because there's going to be a need. We're going to need flexible dollars to ensure that, to ensure we could flexible so we can ensure we're able to solve the real problems happening on the floor, on the ground in our communities. I mean, it would be interesting to hear what some of the other advocates in your areas are saying, and what's their approach to this year's budget.
Well, I don't know. I was going to throw in maybe this other wrench component that, within the federal administration, the incoming federal administration, is the amount of pressure that they can use to withhold funds on not just our sectors, but across a number of different sectors, because they don't believe in the things that we're doing, right? The sanctuary state component of things. Like, I heard a congressman, a Republican congressman, talking about withholding, transportation dollars, just to make sure that we didn't comply with the sanctuary state component, right? So again, that's within the environment. Transportation, funding is a whole different other piece of like, there's a huge deficit that's coming into the transportation world that needs to be solved for. And then you have these other wrenches from the incoming federal administration that talking about, well, we're going to withhold some of that recovery, going back to the LA fires, the recovery money from FEMA to assist people who were most impacted by this. They're talking about putting strings attached to some of this funding. So like, that's a huge other component. Like, and even federal dollars that come in often take years to actually come into the state coffers, right? So again, for me, it's a lot of questions, more than anything, of like, what if. That being said, we still go ask for money, right? Because we need to, right? Our communities, California's communities, need that money to be invested on the ground and to actually make a meaningful impact.
And I think on the topic about like the administration, how that's gonna in turn impact our economy. When you're talking about immigrants, 10 million people in California are immigrants. 1 in 8 U.S. residents actually live in California. So that's going to have a big impact in one in our Latino communities, but then also in general as a state, because less folks are going to be working. How does that attribute to our overall, state general fund?
Yeah, and I think the last big question mark, tariffs. Right?
I forgot that one.
because you're going to have a huge imbalance of how the state deals with that. A lot of revenue and business that we do is with Mexico, right, as a state. So like, what is that going to do to the economy as a whole? Like, when we're looking at receipts coming in for revenue for the state later on. So there's a huge big question mark between now and the May revise, of what's going to happen. So like, again, good budget overall, I would say, for today.
For all the things we know and just listed. It could have been worse.
Before any further crisis.
No, it really is just a big question mark.
Yeah, and I would say for when you're speaking about exports and everything, and that creates revenue for the United States and California, but it's also California is uniquely positioned because we have several ports, the transportation corridors, so the trucking industry is also in our state that goes to other states, and so there will be a ripple effect if there's less goods being received and so forth. That means more people may lose their job if if there's a significant imbalance in what's to come internationally with trade, that would mean more people on our safety nets, right? So more people, if they lose their job, might need to go to Medi-Cal or Medicaid. Our safety net system needs to be significantly stronger. More people, going to public benefit programs or so forth, unemployment, which is continuing to be a reason why we're a little bit in the red in California, is because we're still recovering from COVID unemployment dollars. So
let's make that safety net an actual net. None of these hole. Right now it's like a little mantel with all these little holes in it. I mean, we just need something strong so you can actually fall back.
And it needs to capture Californians, all Californians, immigrant communities as well. And I think for immigrant Californians who are going to lose their job because of immigration enforcement or potential threats at the work site, they're gonna have a place where there's not gonna be able to be captured. But there's coalitions out there that have been advocating for them to be included in safety net programs for food, for employment programs where there's wage replacement if they lose their job or so forth. So it's fortunate because we have people like us that are in the Capitol working with community members. I think that's the biggest thing, right? We're not doing this work alone. We're doing it with community members. So what about in education, Carol? It sounded like everything was peas in the pod and all the birds and unicorns. What are advocates saying in education?
In relation to the budget?
Yeah.
Well, I think the devil's in the details, and so
Press statement.
Yeah, the devil's in the details. No, I think we're all eager and excited to figure out what's going to be in trailer bill language, so that as advocates we can better advocate for the things that we want. Because there's a lot of details that aren't out there. I think we're just kind of playing the waiting game, and then also seeing how we can be influential with the governor's office, Department of Finance, folks who have a voice in those agencies to kind of advocate on our behalf, but also in line with what we want. But yeah, it's a little bit of a waiting game.